Today we're reading Tales from the Other World by Susan Schubert. Before we get to today's story, first a little housekeeping. We've been made aware of a problem with our email address. Apparently, some have been getting an undeliverable message or not getting through at all when sending to windowread@gmail.com. We believe the problem has been fixed, so please try again if you have experienced this problem or have not heard from us. Sorry for the inconvenience, and thank you for your support. Now, let's get to today's story. Susan Schubert has written 5 books, numerous short stories, and poems. 2 of her books, The Way I Remember It, Memoir of a Trip to Europe 1971, and My Place of Dreams, a Love Story, are available on Amazon. Today we're reading Susan's short story called Tales from the Other World. It was late, and the streets were empty. It was December 5th. It was colder than usual that night. I was walking home from my job. Not even a car was seen other than those parked along the curb. There was a half moon. The stars were strewn across the sky, shining brightly like twinkling lights in an Italian yard party. I noticed an eerie silence as I hurried along, clasping my blue thermal jacket tight around me. My red muffler was draped over my nose and mouth, and my Cubs World Series knitted hat nestled tightly around my ears. It was Chicago, after all. The Cubs had finally won the World Series late that fall, and every fan, young, old, and fair-weathered, was still in complete shock. After 108 years, it was about time. We needed this win, deserved it. It was ours to celebrate and sing their praises long and loud. The alley that I used to cut over to my gangway and house was not very far from the hallowed Wrigley Field. We could hear the cheers and the roar that night when, after a 2-hour rain delay, we came back and took the game. The Cubs were in Ohio, but the fans were at Wrigley. My job was only a few blocks away at an insurance company where I was trying to learn life underwriting, a step needed to get coverage. I had been there a few months after graduating from college with a degree in English. I had wanted to teach, but there were no jobs available since so many were becoming teachers. I was overqualified for most jobs and underqualified for others. All I really wanted to do was write. I had an imagination and could sense things before they happened. I turned around when I heard what sounded like the dragging of metal chains. There was a very soft tingling of bells. I thought, what is going on here? My imagination was at the ready. I looked and saw nothing. No one. It started to get louder. Then there were low drones sounding like someone was beating on an oil drum, tinny yet deep. I started to quicken my pace. Run. There was a loud bang and a siren with a high-pitched horn blowing a single note over and over. The sky was brighter, as if there was a fire somewhere, and the smoke drifted into view. By this time, I was at my gate, trying to unlatch it and get into my yard for safety. I saw then that it was my yard that was ablaze. There were creatures wearing hair shirts and horns on their masked heads. They had long tails curling out from behind and hoofs on their feet like goats. Giant goats. Okay, I know the goat was the cub's nemesis, but he was gone now, dead to us, and no threat to our team. Some were beating on drums that looked like exhaust from old cars, and some were blowing horns. The cacophony of sounds was dizzying. This ritual dancing around the bonfire in my yard was more than intriguing. My eyes were glued to the procession. The gleaming eyes, the cavorting, I became entranced and found myself wanting to join the fray. That day, a co-worker had told me about St. Nicholas and that he came the night of the 5th with candy for good boys and girls. They would leave their shoes on the door stoop. In the morning, they would come out to find their treasures. My family had never done this, but I thought that would be fun to share with my children someday. When I grew up, my parents would do the tree decorating and set out the toys during Christmas Eve night, after we were in bed. The next morning, we thought Santa had done it all. The guy from work had mentioned an alter ego that came before St. Nicholas. He punished the naughty children. What did they call him? Krampus. That was it. He told me Krampus was goat-like, 1 part goat, 1 part devil. These apparitions in my yard certainly were devilish, but why were they there? So many of them. There weren't that many bad children in our neighborhood, were there? Krampus had come from the old pagan world before Christ and Christmas, an ancient ritual. He showed up in many different countries: Norway, Finland, Germany, Poland. He had the same goat-like look with the chains and bells, horns and tails. The children and adults were punished with birch sticks used to beat them. There was usually a fire that they danced around, Krampus and his minions, before the winter solstice. My face became warmed from the fire as I got closer, and although I did not feel that I was in danger, I wondered about the children, those nasty neighbor kids that kept tossing garbage into our garden. Maybe these ghouls were after them. The tin beating, the horns, the dancing kept up and was working into more of a frenzy when the fire sprouted up into the sky with bits of ashes. The front gate flew open and the dancing goats took off in procession out the gangway to the street and then down towards the corner. Everyone on the block was out now, watching. The horns were blaring as they continued toward the end of the block and the street beyond. I stayed behind as I watched the fire diminishing and literally go away, as if it had never been there. One of my neighbors from across the alley came over to see if I was all right. I guess I had tripped and fallen as I was walking into my yard. He was coming out to put out the garbage for the next morning's pickup. I had hit my head on the garbage bin, a concrete box that was at every back gate. Rubbing the side of my head, a little bloody from the fall, I remembered the goats and the procession. All was quiet now, though. The stars were still shining brightly, and the moon was still out, moving slowly across the sky. Orion, my favorite constellation, was in full view, and I could see the Christmas star shining brighter than the rest over in the eastern sky. There was a bump forming on my head. "Where did the goats go?" I asked my neighbor. He looked at me like I was crazy and said, "What goats?" The fire, the dancing goats, the horns. I saw it. You must have imagined it when you hit your head. But it seemed so real. I shivered. Was it a dream? Had my fall provoked my imagination? It had been so real I could still hear that noise, smell the smoke from the fire, and yet there was nothing there. My yard was empty, just like I had left it in the morning. I got some ice and put it on. As I lay back on the couch to gather my thoughts, the doorbell rang. It was another neighbor from across the street. She had a bell in her hand, like the ones the goats had on their chains. It was tinkling softly as she handed it to me.